All right, there are definitely lots of different types of governments out there, and political scientists generally can ask three questions and categorize the type of government you have based on the response, right? So, the first question we're going to look at to determine what kind of government you have is who is allowed to participate in the decision making process. Like, who makes the rules or regulations? Who makes the policies? Who makes the laws? Is it one person? Is it some people? Is it a lot of people? Depending on how you answer the question, determines what kind of government you end up with. So the first is a dictatorship. So a dictatorship is ruled by one person. So there's like one person that's making most of the political decisions. Power is usually taken and it's usually kept by force. Oftentimes, these dictators used to be in charge of the military, and they use the military to seize power and to take over it and to keep it. There are 53 countries in the world today that are officially classified as dictatorships. And an example would be Cameroon, which is overseen by a man named Paul Biya, who has led Cameroon since 1982, where he staged a coup, toppled the government that existed previously by using the military, and he's kept power by force ever since. Um, and if you take a look at the map, the blue are areas that today are typically classified as dictatorships, and you can see many of them are found on the continent of Africa. A monarchy is also ruled by one person sometimes, but sometimes those monarchs can kind of rule in team with elected officials, right? So oftentimes monarchs, right? The difference between a monarchy and a dictatorship is dictatorships usually take power by force and keep it by force, whereas monarchs usually pass power hereditarily from like family member to family member, right? And again, there are very few today absolute monarchies where you basically have a person that's like making most of the decisions, like an actual monarch, like you may have learned about in a previous Sostes class. Most of the time now, a lot of the monarchies that you think of in the world today are actually constitutional monarchies because, yeah, there is a ruling like family, like king, queen, prince, princess, but they don't really do a whole lot. They don't have a lot of political power. There's also elected officials that rule alongside of them that have most of the power. And an example of that would be the King of Sweden since 1973 is a man named Carl Gustaf. So he is a monarch by title, but there's also like a democratically elected government in Sweden too that makes most of the decisions. And the same thing with like England today, right? There is a King of England, and there's princes and princesses, but they don't really have much political power. Parliament, right, is elected by the people, right, and that's who's making most of the decisions, not the monarch. And again, you look and see sort of like again, not a whole lot of absolute monarchies left in the world today. Most of them are constitutional monarchies. All right. The next one is an oligarchy. This isn't ruled by one person, but it's ruled by a select few. So a little bit more than one, but definitely like not a lot of people involved in the process. Power is usually concentrated in the hands of the extreme minority to rule the vast majority. So it's a small number of people that are making most of the decisions. So there's not a whole lot of practical examples in the world today of an oligarchy, but I can give you like kind of an historical example. So from like the late 1940s to the early 1990s, in South Africa, there was a system known as apartheid. And these were rules and regulations designed by the white minority population to basically oppress the large black South African overwhelming majority population. This system was eventually toppled by a man named Nelson Mandela, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for doing so. But this would be the best example I could give you of an oligarchy. Is like power is concentrated in the hands of the extreme minority, and they're ruling the extreme majority. And then if you want to look at our type of government, right, that most resembles the United States, it's an indirect democracy or a republic. So this is when more people are involved, but not to like only a certain extent. So citizens like us elect rulers, and then those rulers are entrusted to vote on the actual laws, right? So in the United States, most citizens aren't voting on the laws; they're voting on the people that then make the decisions on the laws. Like, we select the leaders and they make the decisions from there. That's why it's called an indirect democracy. Our system is also known as a republic, right? And then a lot of people being involved, or everybody, would be a direct democracy. This is when all citizens have the opportunity to vote on all laws, right? This isn't really practical in a big country like the United States, right? But like ancient Rome, the old school colonial New England town meetings, everybody gets together and they vote on all of the policies. So this usually works on a much smaller level. There are some examples of states using direct democracy, right? It's the closest we get to direct democracy. Like, we're not a direct democracy in the United States, but there are elements of it. So, like, for example, there are like referendums that are often put on ballots, right, in the United States. So, for example, in certain circumstances, citizens can vote directly on the laws. Some states have allowed citizens to decide if they want their state to legalize marijuana or to raise the minimum wage. Or in Abington, we let the voters to vote directly on whether or not they wanted to finance a new middle school project, right? Again, that's not normally how our system works. We're usually an indirect democracy, but every once in a while, we have characteristics on the state level of a direct democracy, just not on the national level. Right. So these are the different ways you can categorize the government based on the amount of people that are able to participate.